Welcome to the explainer. So you planted a wisteria, right? You were probably dreaming of those cascading, incredibly fragrant lavender blossoms, turning your garden into a literal paradise. But instead, well, you're just looking at a giant wall of green. Today, we're diving into the beautiful but notoriously stubborn world of the wisteria vine to figure out exactly why yours is holding out on you. If you've been staring at this leafy green monster that completely refuses to produce even a single flower, I want to completely validate your frustration. You are definitely not alone here. Coaxing a wisteria into bloom is genuinely one of the most common, hair-pulling challenges gardeners face. Because look, wisteria is wildly vigorous. Left to its own devices, it'll climb your house, pry off your roof tiles, and literally put on 3 meters of growth in a single season, all without giving you one single blossom. But hey, there is hope, and it actually comes in a pretty surprising form. As one home gardener, Harish Patel, brilliantly put it, this plant responds incredibly well to tough love. We all want to baby our plants, right? But wisteria? It needs a totally different approach. Discipline and honestly, some pretty harsh treatment are the actual secret ingredients to unlocking those gorgeous blooms, and we're absolutely covering that today. We're basically going to treat this explainer like a diagnostic garden clinic. We'll quickly run through the wisteria bloom mystery, check on plant age and origins, dial in the sun, soil and nutrients, master the 2-prune system, look at some advanced troubleshooting, and then wrap up with your final takeaways. All right, first up, the wisteria bloom mystery. Let's define exactly what we're dealing with when a wisteria stubbornly refuses to flower. So wisteria is this vigorously fast-growing vine, and if you leave it completely unchecked, it's going to instinctively pour all its energy into massive leafy expansion. Botanists call this vegetative growth. Its main goal in life? Just scramble up to the top of the nearest tree canopy to grab all the light. It literally doesn't want to make flowers, it just wants to make biomass. So our job as gardeners is to actively interrupt that biological imperative. We have to force it to switch gears from building leaves to building blossoms. Moving on to section 2, plant age and origins. Because before you even pick up a pair of pruning shears, we really need to know what kind of vine we're actually dealing with. There is a massive difference in your expectations depending on how your specific wisteria was propagated. If you're buying a wisteria, you always want to look for a grafted plant. A grafted vine is essentially a clone taken from mature, already blooming wood, and it's attached to a hardy rootstock. You can actually physically see it. There's going to be a bulge or kind of kink right near the base of the main stem. That grafted plant hits the ground running and usually blooms in just 3 to 7 years. But if your plant was grown from seed, well, that is a completely different story. Yeah, if it was grown from seed, you could be waiting an agonizing 8 to 15 years, sometimes up to 20 full years before it hits the biological maturity just to produce its very first flower. Plus, seed-grown wisterias have completely unpredictable genetics, so even when it finally does bloom, the flowers might be tiny, pale, or completely missing that signature scent. So if your vine is young and doesn't have that graft bulge, your only real solution right now might literally just be extreme patience. Okay, section 3, sun, soil, and nutrients. Let's say your plant is definitely grafted, it's old enough, but it still won't bloom. Let's take a closer look at its environment and its daily diet. The absolute crucial point here is understanding that classic NPK fertilizer ratio. Did you know wisteria is actually part of the legume family? That means it has a literal superpower. It fixes its own nitrogen right out of the atmosphere. Because of this, it needs almost zero supplemental nitrogen from you. If it happens to catch some high nitrogen lawn fertilizer drifting over from your grass, it will absolutely kill your bloom cycle and trigger explosive leafy growth instead. What you want is a balanced or phosphorus-rich feed. Think a 20-20-20 liquid fertilizer at half strength, or maybe some bone meal. That's going to actively encourage those flower buds to form. Beyond just dialing back the nitrogen, you've got to make sure your environmental basics are locked in. A shaded wisteria simply cannot produce blooms. It needs a minimum of 6 hours of full direct sunlight every single day. The soil has to be well-draining, and this is key. You want to make sure the root zone doesn't completely dry out between July and September. Why? Because that is the exact window when the plant is silently forming all those microscopic buds for next spring's flowers. All right, on to section 4, the 2-prune system. If your soil and sun are perfect, we have reached the absolute most critical part of this whole explainer, and honestly, the place where most home gardeners get it entirely wrong. We're talking about the famous 7-2 rule. It's a two-step pruning system that hits the brakes on runaway growth and forces the plant to build short, stubby little flowering spurs. Here's how it works. In late summer, so July or August, you take all those crazy long whippy green shoots and you ruthlessly cut them back so there are only about 5 to 6 leaves left on each stem coming off the main branch. Then, in the dead of winter, January or February, when the plant is bare and totally dormant, you go right back to those exact same stems and cut them back even further, leaving just 2 or 3 little buds. So why go through all this trouble? Because pruning is a massive biological trigger. By strictly limiting the physical space the plant has to grow leaves, you're literally signaling it to invest its biochemical energy into blossoms instead of useless biomass. That summer prune lets sunlight deep into the canopy to ripen the wood, and the winter prune ensures that all of the plant's spring energy gets channeled directly into those remaining 2 or 3 buds. Seriously, bloom abundance is never accidental with Wisteria. It is always, unequivocally, pruned into existence. Which brings us to Section 5, Advanced Troubleshooting and Shocking. What if you're doing absolutely everything right, and year after year, it still won't flower? Well, if you're still not seeing flowers, it might be time for a shock. We're going to look at a fascinating, slightly extreme method that experienced gardeners use to force a stubborn vine right into compliance. This technique is called root pruning. In early spring, you grab a sharp garden spade and you step back about 1.5 to 2 feet away from the main trunk. Then, you aggressively drive that spade 8 to 10 inches deep into the soil in a full circle around the plant. You are intentionally severing the roots. I know, it sounds like you're killing it, but I promise you aren't. By purposefully damaging about half of the root system, you cause a massive spike in stress. The plant essentially panics, thinks its life might be threatened, and immediately shifts all its biological energy toward reproducing before it dies. And reproducing for a wisteria means creating an absolute abundance of flowers. Finally, Section 6, Final Takeaways and Variabilities. Let's pull all these actionable steps together so you have a clear game plan for your garden tomorrow. If you systematically check off these boxes, you're directly addressing the plant's biology and setting yourself up for spectacular success. First, verify your plant is actually a grafted variety and give it a few years to mature. Next, make sure it's baking in the full sun and keep those high nitrogen lawn fertilizers far, far away from its root zone. Third, strictly stick to that 7-2 summer and winter pruning routine. And finally, if all else fails, do not be afraid to give it that severe root-shocking haircut in the spring. Just a quick disclaimer though, even with absolutely perfect care, Mother Nature is still ultimately calling the shots. You could do every single thing right, and a sudden, uncontrollable late spring frost can just instantly freeze and kill those developing flower buds. It's completely out of your control. If that happens, just take a deep breath, be patient, keep up with your pruning, and look forward to next year. And of course, if persistent issues continue, it never hurts to consult a local gardening expert for your specific climate zone. So, are you ready to tame your wisteria? Now that you know the secrets to turning that leafy green monster into a breathtaking floral display, what's going to be your first step out in the garden tomorrow? And it really begs the question, if wisteria requires this much tough love, what other stubborn plants in your garden are just waiting for a good shock to the system to reveal their hidden blooms? Until next time, keep digging.